Welcome back to another violin tutorial video. We're going to explore vibrato today. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about vibrato because it represents such an important part of our sound. It's something that enhances the vibrations of our strings. It makes our sound bigger. It makes it sound more expressive. It gives us a chance to really speak from our heart. But it also is kind of personal. You know, everybody's vibrato is slightly different, and we sort of connect the sound of who we are as a musician sometimes with our vibrato. It also represents a very professional sound. And working on vibrato is something that we shouldn't neglect. Sometimes we fall into this camp even subconsciously of saying, well, you either have good vibrato or you don't have good vibrato. The truth is we can build the skill of vibrato, which, just like any of the techniques we've talked about, includes listening well, knowing what sound we want, understanding the motion and the feeling of it, and then just being really aware of how we can build those skills slowly from the beginning. So let's talk first about what is vibrato. What is it? And this is true of any instrument or singer that uses vibrato. Vibrato itself is just an oscillation or a changing up and down of frequency, of the pitch that we're hearing. And we can imagine a sound wave, if you've seen on an oscilloscope, or a sine wave, what that looks like. Just like a sound wave, vibrato can be described in terms of width, or what we might call the amplitude, and also the frequency or the speed of the vibrato. So how wide is our vibrato? How fast is our vibrato? And just like a radio wave, we're trying to work on that amplitude modulation or the frequency modulation, our AM or our FM adjustments. So as we're working on those two elements, let's talk about some overall principles of vibrato. The principles, as we apply to the violin, is first of all that it is a pitch variation. We're ultimately changing pitch. Well, how do we change pitch on a stringed instrument? We do that by just changing where the finger is touching on the fingerboard. We do have to make sure, though, that we're not using a sliding motion to vibrato, but more a rolling motion of the fingertip. So that's one important principle. We're changing the pitch by rolling the fingertip rather than sliding the hand. The next principle is understanding which direction the vibrato pitch is changing. Are we starting on a solid center pitch and then going down and then back up to that pitch? Or is it the solid center pitch and we're going up and back down to the center? Or is it a little bit of both? Does it go up and down? And maybe interested to know that there's been a lot of scientific study on vibrato, listening to recordings of lots of different instrumentalists, including string players. And the truth is, vibrato goes both directions. It goes up and down, which makes sense. It makes kind of a balanced way of enhancing the resonance of a center pitch by going up and down. The next principle is thinking about the type of motion that we use physically. Generally speaking, there are two types of vibrato on the violin and the viola. One is what we sometimes refer to as wrist vibrato, or some people call hand vibrato. In hand vibrato, the fulcrum is the wrist itself. That's the hinge point. And then we're moving the hand back and forth this way as if we're waving to ourselves from the side. It's like, hello, self. And we're just kind of pivoting there from the wrist. The other type is pivoting from the elbow, and often we call this arm vibrato. This involves a bigger motion, and we're using bigger muscles, but there are advantages and disadvantages of each type of vibrato. Some teachers teach a little bit of a combination of both, where the energy starts in the arm and then finishes in the hand, kind of like a whiplash effect. And there are some really nice effects of having that motion in our vocabulary. When we talk about alignment, we want to make sure that the hand is close to the fingerboard so that that pitch variation is at its most effective. When it gets a little bit out of effectiveness is when we pull our hand too far away, and then this wave motion ends up being at an angle to the fingerboard rather than being as straight up and down as possible. And just to demonstrate that, I'll try doing a vibrato away from the fingerboard up in fourth position. And then doing it close to the fingerboard. And the second one was a lot wider, and you could hear the sort of juiciness of that vibrato. So when we align our hand close to the fingerboard so that it is really enhancing this up and down string angle, we're the most effective in our wave motion. We need to think about supporting the violin a little bit differently sometimes when we vibrato, because we're letting go of our first finger contact point, or at least allowing it to slide. So sometimes it's helpful to think of really good support with the head here, like very heavy head weight, and then just make sure that the thumb is loose and not gripping too much. There is some support actually from the fingertip itself. When we think about the thumb and the finger, that opposing motion can help to support the weight of the violin as well. But we want to make sure that it feels healthy, that we're not gripping, that we're able to find a little bit of assistance here from the head, and then keeping it really, really loose. So that's violin support. And the last principle that we'll explore is really looking more closely at this idea of width versus speed. And so if you can imagine that sound wave that has a big amplitude, that would be kind of like a really wide vibrato. Well, the question is, how wide should a vibrato be? How wide is too wide? How narrow is too narrow? And generally speaking, we can have a very subtle vibrato and have it be quite effective. But there is kind of like a maximum limit to what sounds pleasant to the ear. And that is basically up to about a half step of pitch variation when we're working on vibrato. If it goes much beyond a half step, it just ends up sounding a little out of tune. Or like what we sometimes do when we make fun of opera singers who are past their prime and their vibrato is a little wider than we'd like to have. We want to have enough focus that we can still hear that center pitch and enhance the pitch rather than the vibrato becoming a distraction to the music. With speed, there is definitely a range of speed that is effective in enhancing the vibration of the pitch. And it's very, very specific. We've been able to study this and measure it scientifically. The speed of a good vibrato is somewhere between 5 and 7 cycles per second. That's complete cycles. And you might think, well, that's pretty abstract. How do you measure that? It's actually very easy to measure, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you click your metronome onto 60 beats per minute, 60 beats per minute is 1 beat per second. So if we were going to measure 1 cycle of vibrato per second, it would be starting at the pitch, and then waving away from it, and then coming back in that 1 second. So it would be, or if we're hearing the variation as kind of like a rhythm of notes, it's like playing the wave in 1/8 notes to make 1 cycle per second. Or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. What if we did 16th notes? That would be 2 cycles per second. What if we did a group of 6? That would be 3 cycles per second. What if we did 32nd notes? That's 4 cycles per second. We're almost to 5. And if we go just a little faster, we can hear it sounds like a pleasant vibrato that's just enhancing the pitch. Now, what if we went too fast? 8 cycles per second would be 64th notes. So instead of digga 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 digga, it would be dilly 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 dilly, which you can try. And you can tell that's just a little bit too fast to be pleasant. It kind of sounds like a nanny goat or somebody who's stuck their finger in an electrical outlet or something like that. So that range is something to shoot for, that 5 to 7. Let's talk for a minute now about the physical aspect of learning how to do it. So we're going to go through some basic exercises of how to develop control in all of these speeds and in the width. First of all, we're going to use all of these exercises with the metronome because it helps us to stay honest, helps us to stay in control. The first is to do just a simple exercise that I call the wave. We're just waving to ourselves in the air. We're going to use wrist vibrato as our example today, but we could do all of these exercises with arm vibrato as well. So wrist vibrato, we're going to just wave in the air, kind of put your hand up sort of where the violin is, and we're just waving to ourselves, okay? And if we do it with the metronome, I like to think about going back on the beat just because it encourages a sense of looseness and opening this side of our joint. We can do it in the air, just invisibly waving, or if you have an egg shaker or some kind of container with some dry lentils in it or beans or something. This is a little old film canister, or if you have something like a Tic Tac thing, that works really well. So if we do it with the shaker, we can actually hear audibly that we're matching the metronome as well as feeling it, okay? So when we're doing every click, it feels kind of like eighth notes. The next step would be to do some triplets. Triplets are really useful because we get to feel the back motion on the beat and also the forward motion on the beat, which helps to make it very, very even, okay? And that brings up the point of what are we looking for when we're doing all of these exercises? It's really 3 important principles. One is that the motion is big, that we're using the whole range of motion just for practice. Number 2, it's very relaxed. Vibrato just simply won't exist in a tense environment. And number 3, we want it to be very even. And that's the reason why we're making the metronome a part of our practicing. If it feels a little bit spastic or sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast, we won't be able to gain the control that we need over those muscles. So let's try that same exercise, but going a little bit faster and keeping in mind those 3 elements: looseness, evenness, and big range of motion. Here is 16th notes. I feel like I want to be in a salsa band now. That's good. How about 6 tuplets? And then 30-second notes. You notice that as we get faster, the range of motion naturally gets a little bit smaller, and that's very good, that's fine, as long as it feels loose and relaxed. So there's our shaker exercise. We might call that simply the wave or the shaker, whatever helps. The second exercise is to practice that wave feeling, but with the hand against the violin, first in rest position or in guitar position. We're going to start in 4th position, basically where the hand comes up and touches the violin. The reason for that is so that there's some support with the wrist joint itself. It has something to kind of rest against as we try to work on that wave. So with the metronome on, we'll do those same sets of rhythms. The thumb doesn't move and the hand doesn't move, but everything else is going to wave. In this case, we're sort of waving to the bridge of our violin here. So we back, 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 triplets, triplet, 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 16ths, 6 tuplets, and then our 30 seconds as we do that. The next step would be to do that same wave on the violin, but this time in playing position. And with a big range of motion, I'm reaching all the way back almost to my pegs because I have kind of long fingers. and then all the way up here off the top of the fingerboard. It's a big direction just to feel like it's open and easy and relaxed. Good, and I can do that with all of my rhythms. The next exercise, next step, is to polish the string with your fingertip. So we're still in fourth position. We're gonna lightly touch, and we'll start with the second finger. And we're just going to touch the string while we do the wave. We're still sliding. We're still being very big with our motion. Sometimes I like to think of the fingertip bridging between two strings as if it was like a railroad track that keeps the alignment really true. So in this case, maybe between D and A with my second finger. And again, we could do triplets and 16th notes and sextuplets and 30 seconds and all of those things. One other thing you could try with the polishing the string exercise is to actually put a little tiny piece of tissue or paper towel or something under your fingertip, and it makes it even slipperier, which just encourages the sense of real looseness as we're sliding on the string. And then the last exercise we're going to do with the bow, and instead of sliding now, we're going to keep the fingertip stationary and then practice rolling the fingertip, okay? Before we do that exercise though, there's sort of a bonus exercise we want to work on first, and that is to get the feeling of that knuckle being very, very loose. It's that last knuckle next to the fingernail. We want that to be very mobile so that that rolling motion can really happen. And so for that exercise, I'm going to put my bow down. I'm going to hold my violin in rest position and put my second finger first just on the top of the violin where the varnish is. And we do this because the varnish is a little bit sticky. It has a little bit of friction to it. And we're going to pull the finger flat and come back to a curved position, back and forth to work on the looseness of that knuckle. One image I really like to use here is pretend that there's a little drop of super glue on your fingertip and you're trying to yank it off and it won't come off. That way the collapsing motion happens from the hand pulling rather than pushing down with your finger. So we want it to be a reaction of what's happening in the hand motion rather than pushing it down with the finger. So we could do that with all four fingers. We can do it with the metronome. And we're just working on the looseness of that knuckle. And that's a good preliminary exercise. Okay, so this last one, we'll do it with the bow, in playing position, in fourth position. We're gonna find our second finger first. We always start with 2 because it's the middle of our hand and it's the easiest to feel even wave motion. I find my F sharp in fourth position. And then we're gonna roll slowly, very slowly, from a tall position to a really flat position. And we'll do it with the bow so we can hear the half step change. I like to call this the police siren exercise or the European ambulance siren exercise. You get the idea. We want to check in with our principles of looseness, big motion, and even motion from side to side. And then from there, we're trying to get it a little faster. So let's do eighth notes. If we were doing arm vibrato, by the way, instead of anchoring the hand there, we would just move the hand away and let the elbow be the pivot point. But let's go back to wrist vibrato and we'll try some of these other accelerations. Let's do triplets. And sixteenths. And sextuplets. And 30-second notes. And we're almost to vibrato. speed. Just a little bit faster and we'll be in the zone of 5 to 6 cycles per second. And you can hear that looseness creates a nice width to the vibrato. As you're practicing going from slow to fast, there will inevitably be a moment where it goes from controlled and relaxed to like spastic. And that's kind of like the wall of our vibrato ability, or the wall of our speed. So when that happens, we just want to back it off again, come back to the slow speed, take it into the controlled zone and go a little faster and then come back. Eventually what will happen is we do these regularly, that wall of ability will move forward and forward and forward, and eventually we'll be able to have control in all of those speeds. Obviously we want to practice all those exercises with all 4 fingers, and each finger has its own challenge. 2 is the most natural because it's in the middle of the hand. 1 is the most cramped, and sometimes we have to really pull back to get the range of motion for the first finger, kind of lean back on it. 3 can be quite relaxed and natural, but we want to make sure that we're not gripping so that that knuckle can't move. We want to really try to let it flatten all the way. And of course, 4th finger is the most challenging. 4th is our puniest finger, generally has the tiniest fingertip, and it also has to stretch the farthest. So there's the least amount of range of motion with the 4th finger. And so there are a couple of things that we can do with the 4. One is to think of touching a little bit more on the pad of the fingertip rather than on the tip right by the fingernail. There's just not a lot of surface area at the fingernail, but if we touch a little bit more on the pad, then we have a little bit more width to our vibrato sound, more pitch variation. Sometimes it's helpful to give a little support to the 4th finger with the 3. Notice how my 3rd finger is down also. That helps to give a little bit of structure and a little bit of shape. The last thing I would say about 4th finger vibrato, though, is to not be afraid of using it. The more we use it, the easier it gets. And don't be insecure about it. 4th finger vibrato often doesn't sound exactly the same as the other fingers. That doesn't mean it's not good. We just want to try to make it as loose and relaxed as we possibly can. Just in closing, I want to add one more advanced vibrato exercise to help with the concept of continuous vibrato as we change from finger to finger. And this exercise is doing a slow police siren wave. I'll do it here in 3rd position. But what we're trying to accomplish is to change from finger to finger in the middle of a vibrato wave. So our vibrato waves are symmetrical. They're groups of 2, right? It's like the pitch, away from the pitch, and then back to the pitch. What we're going to do is do an odd number of wiggles and then change the next finger in the middle of that wiggle. What that also means is that from our tall position to our collapsed position, every other finger is either going to be placed tall or collapsed. So I'll show this in really slow motion. I'll do groups of 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Did you see how that worked? I'll do it one more time. It's a terrible sounding exercise. Make sure your doors are closed. There's no pets nearby that could start howling because it does not sound nice. But you can see my 1st finger and my 3rd finger are placed at the tall side of the vibrato. My 2nd and 4th finger are placed on the flat side of the vibrato. I'll do it a little faster. And if I do groups of 5, the pitch is very unstable, but it keeps the wave moving even through the finger changes. The application is I can keep the constant wave of that vibrato going no matter what's happening in terms of placing and lifting. The bad example that often interrupts musical phrases is that we vibrate one finger and it's really comfortable, and then we stop it in between each one, and it tends to kind of interrupt our phrase a little bit. Let me just play two quick examples using this concept of continuous vibrato, but also the idea that as an expressive tool, vibrato can have many different colors in terms of speed and width, just depending on the character that we're looking for. I'll play just a little section of the Mendelssohn Concerto, the second movement, in a passage where I do like to use a little bit more arm vibrato. And the reason is the arm vibrato for me has a little bit more endurance to it. It's not quite as tiring because I'm using these bigger muscles. It also allows me to get a little bit more of a shimmery sound, a little bit more narrow and fast, while using a little bit less energy. So I'm going to try to play with as continuous vibrato as possible, and the character that I'm looking for is very sweet and shimmery. Okay, a little bit fast, a little bit narrow. It's one approach to that. And then I'll play one section now from the Wieniawski D major concerto, or excuse me, D minor concerto, the second movement, which is the Romance. And in this section, I'm playing on the G string, and I want a character that's really expressive and really rich and sort of juicy. And for my hand, I like to use more of a wrist vibrato for that kind of motion because it feels more efficient to me. But we want that sense of wide width and slower speed. That's the idea, a little more width, a little bit more juice. So I hope you enjoy working on your vibrato. Just keep your ears open and your awareness open. And above all, make sure that what we're doing physically matches the character of the music. The music is always the ultimate judge of what we should demand of ourselves in terms of all of our technical information. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.